Morning, Tribe Church. My name is Pastor Carrie, and I am so excited to be preaching week 9 of our Follow Me series. So a lot of you know, or maybe if you're new, you don't, but a lot of you know that I was a teacher in my first career. And so before we get started this morning, I just have a quick vocabulary lesson for you, just really quick, just in case you don't know. An Easter egg is actually a slang term. It's both, like an actual egg. But Easter egg is a hidden message or a feature or a reference tucked away in movies, video games, and software, or the Bible, like a little surprise or inside joke for the eagle-eyed fans. Okay, so that's what an Easter egg is, because I use the word Easter egg a lot in this sermon, and I was like, do people know what that is? So I thought, we'll just have a quick vocabulary lesson, because I was a teacher, right? Okay. So during my 15 years in the classroom, there was a lot of trends that happened with classroom rules. And when I first started teaching, the trend was to have like 50 or 60 really specific rules for your classroom. And this was out of some research that came out in the 90s. I started teaching in the early part of the 21st century. And as it turns out, having 50 or 60 rules in one classroom is a hot garbage way to run things. It does not work. No one can remember all of those rules, not even a teacher, okay? And so what you end up doing is you end up spending all of your time managing the rules more so than you are actually teaching. And so by the time I retired out of teaching, I drilled my classroom rules down to 3. Stick together, no hurts, and have fun. And it turns out that's all you need. Those 3 rules pretty much cover anything and everything that a kid could do in a classroom or a school. Stick together, no hurts, have fun. When it comes to rules, if you cover the basic things, that pretty much covers everything. So again, we're in week 9 of our Follow Me series, and I just have to say, every message in the series has been a banger. Some people think a mixtape needs to go up and down like that, like a sermon series needs to kind of go up and down. These have been all up. I feel like these have just all been so good. And how lucky are we that we live in the time where the sermons are recorded for the people at home, people at home. And if you miss one because you were sick or you were on vacation for spring break or whatever, you can go back and watch it. I would encourage you to do that, okay? But just in case you don't, let me summarize everything we've covered so far, okay? Jesus had come to replace everything that was in place. That's basically what we've covered for the last 8 weeks. It's more than that. But this is the gist of it. Jesus had come to replace everything that was in place. He came to introduce something that was brand new, a new covenant, a new command, a new movement. And during this time, he was constantly leaving little Easter eggs about who he was and what he was here to do. In a religious system that valued cleanliness, Jesus not only touched people who were sick, he didn't get sick himself, and he made them well. This was crazy. This was an Easter egg. This was a hint that something new was coming. He said that the people who had the dirtiest hands a lot of times had the purest hearts, which did not bode well for the people who had really clean hands, like the religious leaders. He insisted that if you wanted to be great, you needed to go to the back of the line. And he would say things like, "You have heard it said, but I say." And then he would take an Old Testament command and he would flip it on its ear and change the meaning of it. This was nuts, okay? He claimed to be greater than the temple. And I think that's a hard one for us to grasp here at Tribe Church, where we meet in a building that I love, but I would describe as industrial cute. Okay? It's cute. It's adorable, but it's a little industrial, a little rough sometimes. There was water on the floor today, right? And we got that picked up, and it's all good. We haven't had a bat in here in a couple of weeks, which is fantastic. Industrial cute. So if Jesus came here today and he was like, "I am greater than 119 North Vine," which is where we meet, you'd be like, "Yeah, bro, we know." We get it. So I tried to think of some things that would have the same collective identity and sacred meaning and shared experience in today's sort of culture in our society that would have had the same thing as the temple, had the same sort of feeling. Again, the identity, the collective identity, the sacred meaning that the temple did for the Jewish people. And so here's what I came up with, okay? Jesus was claiming that he was more valuable than Lucas Oil Stadium, okay? And like maybe that's funny, maybe that's not. I didn't get any kind of a laugh. That's terrible. But like think about it, like the collective experience, okay? You go there, everybody's got on their team shirts, or they have the other team shirts, and you're like, and like you're, with the people, like you're high-fiving people you don't know, and like the shared experience, the collective identity. I remember when they were building Lucas Oil Stadium, and you kind of got to watch it as you were driving along, and that was so cool. And when you go in, it is sort of magnificent, and like when they move the roof in and out, like that's pretty cool, right? It's expensive. It was costly. Like, for him to come in and say, like, I'm greater than that, that's a big deal, okay? So, his upside-down value system that Jesus had, it was constantly in conflict with the kingdoms of this world, which, of course, was threatening to the people who ran the kingdoms of the world. And it was also threatening to the religious leaders whose legacy and livelihood Jesus' words actively threatened. And so for the last couple of weeks, we have been on our journey with Jesus, and he's been on his way to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. And we've talked about this before, but the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who found out where Jesus was should report it so that they could arrest him. Because the problem was that there was a crowd everywhere Jesus went, and it is really hard to arrest someone who is always surrounded by a crowd. And so the great crowd that had come for the festival, that's Passover, had come for the festival, heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. The crowd is with him. The excitement and the tension are building. Everyone is expecting Jesus to come into Jerusalem and declare himself king. The Jewish people are excited. Anyone who's in any kind of power is terrified. But everyone thought that he was coming to do something for the Jewish people. But in reality, Jesus was coming to do something for you and for the entire world. And then this weird thing happens, like one of Jesus' followers actually broke rank. Judas got tired of waiting. Maybe he picked up on some of the Easter eggs that the others had missed. And maybe he says to himself, like, he's not going to go in there and declare himself king. Like, he's going to go in there and surrender. All this talk about, like, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And, like, that doesn't sound very kingly. That sounds sort of surrendery. And so Judas kind of puts together that this is all about to go downhill. And he's like, if he's not going in there to declare himself king, he must be going to go in there and do something else. And he's like, if it's going down, I might as well get paid, right? And so Judas goes to the chief priest and says, you want Jesus? I can get you Jesus. And I can get you Jesus when he is not surrounded by a crowd. So the priests agree to do this. They pay him. And he watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when there was no crowd present. Before Jesus allows himself to be taken, before he allowed himself to be arrested, before he willingly went to and stayed on the cross, he had two more loose ends that he had to tie up. He had to change the meaning of Passover, and he had to create a whole new covenant. And that's what we're going to talk about today. One of the things that he did when they were gathered for Passover in the upper room was establish a new kind of relationship between God and all of mankind by changing the meaning of Passover. So the Jewish people had been celebrating Passover since they were slaves in ancient Egypt. This is all the way back in Exodus 11 and 12. It's the second book in the Bible, like the Old Testament of the Bible. And so they were celebrating that the angel of death had passed over, literally passed over, you see it, the homes that had the blood of a 1-year-old perfect, without blemish lamb on the doorframe of the house. They put blood on the doorframe of the house. The homes without this blood, in all the homes in ancient Egypt, without this blood on the door, the firstborn sons died when the angel of death passed over them, humans and animals. And the next morning was described as a loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or will ever be again. The blood of the lamb saves the firstborn sons. And Jewish people today, they still celebrate Passover for the same reason, and in the same way that Jewish people would have in Jesus' time. They have a Seder meal together, and it includes reading from the Haggadah, which is a special text that tells the story of Exodus. They eat symbolic foods like unleavened bread. They drink cups of wine that symbolize redemption. And they recite prayers and blessings and traditional songs, and they engage in storytelling. Does that sound familiar at all? And so when you think about the history of Passover, what Jesus says next is absolutely nuts. It's crazy. He takes the bread and he says, when you eat this bread, you're not going to think about Moses anymore. And you're not going to think about the Exodus from Egypt anymore. Now you're going to think of me and my body that I am giving for you. So I want you to take your communion cup that we gave you this morning. And if you've never seen one of these before, don't get your hopes up. It's kind of multi-layered, so there's a clear layer on top, and you can peel back that clear layer. If there's anybody that needs one, we've got some up here, or Pastor Matt would bring one to you. He would love that.
You're doing great. Good job, Matt. Here, Matt.
So we're going to take the bread together that represents Jesus's broken body. It no longer represents the body of the one-year-old lambs that were without blemish, but it's a man now without blemish, and we're going to take this together. This represents Jesus' body that was given for you, that was beaten for you, that was broken for you, that was sacrificed for you so that you would never have to wonder how your heavenly Father feels about you ever again. And then he takes the wine and he says, when you drink this wine, it's not going to represent the blood of the lamb that saved the firstborn in Egypt. It's going to represent my blood saving the whole world. So we're going to take the second part of that communion cup together. There's a second layer. I know. There's a second layer. You're going to peel that back, and we're going to take the juice together as well. I am struggling. Hopefully you're doing better than I am. And the juice is going to represent Jesus' blood, which was given for you, which was poured out for you. Just like the blood of the lamb saved the firstborn of each family in ancient Egypt, Jesus' blood saves all mankind for all time. And the first communion ceremony signaled the end of God's conditional covenant with the ancient Jewish people and signaled the creation of a new covenant that was unconditional and permanent and for the whole world. That's why we take communion, to remember the broken body and the blood of the Lamb that saved us all, to remember the new covenant that Jesus gave us. It wasn't an and, it was an instead of. Instead of thinking about ancient Egypt, you're going to think about me. It wasn't an and, it was an instead of. There would be a before Jesus and an after Jesus. There would be a before his sacrifice and an after his sacrifice, because Jesus had come to replace everything that was in place. And he changed the meaning of Passover forever. So before we get to the terms and the conditions of Jesus' new covenant that he creates, because he actually is going to explain that a little bit more in a minute, I want to give you just a little bit of backstory, okay? So about a year before they make it into that upper room, Jesus and his guys, they're going along the road, and he's preaching, and he's teaching, and he's healing, and he's showing his guys how to preach and how to teach and how to heal, and he's dropping Easter eggs about his identity the whole time, pointing to what is going to come. And so the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they kind of pick up on this, and they're following him. They're checking up on him, and they're trying to get the crowd to separate from him, but not like they were at the time of Passover. At the time of Passover, they're like, we just got to get this guy by himself. But where we are about a year earlier, what they're actually trying to do is to separate him from the crowd by causing him to sort of lose their trust, by poking holes in his story, by poking holes in what he's saying. Okay, so that's how they're basically trying to get the crowd to cancel him. Okay, and so the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him. So the main guys, they send their guys, and they had carefully crafted a question to trip him up so that he would lose the crowd. And they don't want to seem like the bad guy, so they purposely kind of butter him up before they ask their question. So they're like, teacher, hey. They said, we know that you're a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. And they ask him this question. They say, should we pay our taxes to Caesar? And Jesus, he sees right through what they're doing, okay? Just quick sidebar. I actually started studying Jewish culture when I was a teenager. My high school did the musical Fiddler on the Roof, and I worked in the makeup team. And it meant that I had to learn how to build a bunch of luscious Jewish beards. It was awesome. And those long curly sideburns. A couple of the guys got those. I got to put a beard on Matt Dilley, actually. That was really fun. And so I researched as I was researching how to make high schoolers look like Jewish people from the turn of the 20th century, I became just fascinated with their culture. There was this richness of tradition that the Jewish people had, but there were so many rules to follow. And so it's not surprising, 25 years later, that I ended up on the Jewish side of TikTok. And I've learned a lot. I really have. And one of the things that I've learned is that Orthodox Jewish people or Hasidic Jewish people today still follow a lot of the same rules and regulation that were created in the Old Testament, or what they would call the Tanakh. They still follow the Ten Commandments, and they still follow what's called the Oral Torah. Okay? The Oral Torah is a list of 613 commandments that Jewish people have to follow in order to be right with God. Problem with so many rules is that some of them become sort of hard to interpret. Thou shalt not murder. Oh, it's pretty straightforward, right? We get that one. But for the Jewish people, they're not allowed to strike a match. That's in the Oral Torah. They're not allowed to strike a match on the Sabbath. And so now, because we don't really strike a lot of matches, they're not allowed to use electricity. So flipping on a light switch, that counts as striking a match. And so one of the rabbis that I follow was asked a question. It said, can I take video on the Sabbath? And he said, that's kind of a gray area because, yeah, you can't use a phone on Sabbath because a phone has to be charged with electricity. But if you have a Ring doorbell camera that's running all the time, that's going to be okay because it's not really striking a match, and it's not really it's not the same thing as doing work or whatever. The Ring is just sort of doing its own thing. You probably shouldn't check it, but maybe you should check it if it's a safety thing. So it's this is a gray area. Taking video is a gray area. So what you would need to do, this is what the guy on TikTok says. He says you need to contact your local rabbi to find out. See what your local rabbi has to say about it. And that's what the Pharisees are doing here. They're asking about these gray areas. These gray areas are things that they know are sort of open to interpretation, but that people absolutely have an opinion on. And Jesus has no tolerance for this nonsense. He says, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. So they pull out a coin, they show it to him, he points to the portrait of Caesar that's on it, and he says his famous line, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. He counters their question with a challenge of his own. You better give to Caesar what you owe him, but you better do the same thing with God. And this is not what they were expecting him to say. This was a way better answer than they were expecting. So the Pharisees, their question doesn't work. They scurry off, and the Sadducees are like, all right, our turn. So the Sadducees, they try to think of a better question for their question. They decide they're going to try to separate him from Moses because the Jewish people were like all in on Moses. And so they ask him this complicated question about marriage and the resurrection. And they say, Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and have children for him. And Jesus is like, you dum-dums, that is not how DNA works. Like at all. He's like, you'll see in the future. No, that's not what he says. No, they go on and they're like, what if that guy dies before they have kids, and the next brother and the next brother, until this chick has married and tried to have babies with all 7 brothers and has no babies? Who gets to be her husband in heaven? That's what they want to know. And the crowd's like, that's a good question. I'm curious about that too. So everybody's kind of leaned in. And what the Sadducees were trying to do was they were trying to get Jesus to sort of admit that it was ridiculous to believe in an afterlife. Because the Sadducees didn't believe in an afterlife. That's why they were sad, you see. Thank you. That's like my favorite joke. And Matt hates it so much. I saw his whole body sag when he saw what I was going for. You can remember the difference between Pharisees and Sadducees now. That's why they were sad, you see, because they didn't believe in an afterlife. And so Jesus responds to them. He says, but about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And they're like, what? The crowd is astonished with this answer. And so the Sadducees, they scurry away. They'd set out to trap him, and he just humiliated them instead. And so the Pharisees are all right, it's our turn again. Our turn again. So we got it this time. We got it. And if you grew up in church, you're probably familiar with this question. It says, one of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And law is capitalized here because Jason and Lisa, no, just kidding. It's our youth pastors' names are Jason and Lisa Law. They're on vacation day. Hey guys, we love you so much. The law is capitalized here because it's the law and the prophets, the Old Testament. And everyone in Jesus' audience would have known the answer to this question. They could kind of mouth it along with him. It was kind of their version of love is the best thing we do. And so it was actually the follow-up question that was going to trap Jesus, okay? And turn the crowd against him, like separate him from the crowd. And Jesus, to answer to this question, not only blows the roof off the place, it's another Easter egg that drops hints to his identity. What is the greatest commandment? Jesus replies, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And this is where everyone expected him, this is what everyone expected him to say, and this is where everyone expected him to stop. But Jesus instead takes the opportunity to double it down. And he says, and the second one is like it. And they're like, whoa, hang on, wait. There is no second greatest commandment. And what Jesus is saying here, not only is there a second commandment, it is like the first. And the Greek word for like used here is actually the word homoios. And it means of the same kind. It means belonging in equality. And so what Jesus is doing is he's taking the first commandment and the second commandment, he's elevating them to the same level. The second one is like it. The second one is like it. The second one is on the same level as the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. And this signaled a very important shift in the kingdom of God because things were shifting from a rules-based system to a relationship-based system. The religious world where Jesus lived in, and maybe even the religious world that you grew up in, or the ones that you hear about, and all of the places that you can hear about things, like a person could love God and treat people poorly. And when they were confronted about that, they'd be like, hey man, I go to church, I give, I serve, I'm in this ministry, I pray, I confess my sins, I'm good with God. And they're like, yeah, but what about the way that you treat your wife and treat your kids and respond to your employees and all of that stuff? What about that stuff? I'm like, no. We're not going to talk about that. I'm good with God. I dot my I's, I cross my T's, I follow the rules, I'm good with God. This was a religious community in the first century. This is what it was like. And Jesus doesn't just actually say it here, but this is kind of the same sentiment that he had when he's talking to his guys under the tree from our sermon a couple of weeks back, where he says, "Not so with you. You know how the world works. You know how the religious systems work. You know how the law works. Not so with you." And Jesus punctuates this by saying, all of the law and the prophets, all of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. The law and the prophets, the Old Testaments, Genesis through Malachi, they're sacred texts, they're sacred scriptures. All of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So that means that if you are, reading along in the Old Testament and you get to something and you're like, I don't know what that means. Or like, that guy just killed his daughter. Or like, that guy just did, oh my gosh, with his daughter. Like, and you're like, I don't understand this. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, this is making me uncomfortable. This is weird. Jesus is telling us all of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Love God and love your neighbor. Everything else is history, it's explanation, and it's commentary. And by elevating these two commandments to the same level, Jesus is saying that love for God is best illustrated and demonstrated and authenticated by our love for others. He's taking the 10 commandments and the 613 commandments in the Oral Torah, and he's reducing them down to two that are equal in value. And interestingly enough, both of these ideas actually came from the law and the prophets. It was already in there all the way back at the beginning. They'd just never been placed together before. They'd never been equated before. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. That's Deuteronomy 6:5. And love your neighbor as yourself. That's Leviticus 19:18. The passage in Leviticus defines neighbor as another Jewish person. Okay? And in response to this, the word about this must have spread, that Jesus is saying, like, love your neighbor as yourself, because a couple of weeks later, another expert in the law asks him another trick question. He's basically like, who is my neighbor? Okay, and that's where we get the parable of the Good Samaritan. That was Jesus' response to the question, who is my neighbor? And if you don't know that story, I'll just sum it up for you really quick. There's a man, he gets beat up on the road. A priest walks by, a Levite walks by. Those would have both been Jewish people. And then a Samaritan walks by. And he not only patches him up, but he takes him to a place where he can rest and heal, and he pays for it. And it's important to note here that the Jews and the Samaritans were enemies, okay? It would have been like Pacers and Knicks, okay? Or like Cubs and Cardinals, or Colts and Patriots, if either of them were relevant in football at all. And so by elevating the enemy, that would have been especially noteworthy. Jesus is saying in this parable that there's a new definition of the word neighbor. It's not just another Jewish person, and it's not even necessarily someone who is like you or that you like. From now on, a neighbor is anyone, anywhere, everyone, everywhere who has a need that you can meet. And I think this is so funny because yesterday when I was working on this sermon, our neighbor that we don't know very well knocked on our door, and she was like, hey, you guys know about pools, right? And we're like, kind of. And she's like, can you come look at my auto cover? It's not working. And we know them because they go to our swim school, so we know them a little bit. I'm like, I know they have kids. I know they have dogs. Like, they've got an open pool. Like, yeah, we need to get over there. So we, yesterday in the rain, Matt and I are like on our hands and knees trying to fix this pool cover. We didn't fix it. But it was a really cool kind of experience because she had a need that we could meet because we weren't able to help her, but we were able to get her to someone who could. This is new. Not new for us, but it was new for them. Okay, this is the story of the Good Samaritan. And again, it's telling us that love for God is best illustrated, demonstrated, and authenticated by love for others who are nothing like you and who you may not even like. Not that we didn't like our neighbor. If you're watching this neighbor, we're so excited. You should come to Tribe. And this wasn't just new. This is an Easter egg. This is a sign pointing in a specific direction, hinting at the fact that Jesus wasn't just a good interpreter of the law. He could change the law. And that was a big deal because up until this time, the only person that could create a law or change a law was God. So that's the backstory, okay, as we're getting into this new covenant thing. So back to Passover in Jerusalem. They've just finished the meal. The feet have been washed, but Jesus isn't done. And I sometimes wish that Bible manufacturers didn't just stop at the red letter version that puts the words in Jesus in red letters, because there's a handful of things that I wish we could draw people's attention to a little bit stronger, that it should be in like bold or have their font size increased or something like that, because when Jesus followers get this right, it changes everything. So they're in the upper room with his guys, and Jesus says, after like the communion and the foot washing, the whole thing, he says, "A new command I give you." And this is different than just elevating the second commandment to the same level of the first. This is him creating something. And the disciples honestly should have stood up and walked out if they hadn't walked out when the communion thing happened, when the Passover thing happened. They should have stood up and walked out because this was blasphemy. Only God can make commandments. Moses, he delivered the law to the people, but he didn't create the law. And so Jesus is now, he's making laws, and that means that he is not merely a human man. He's not just a good prophet or a great rabbi. This puts him on the same level as God, because only God can make commands. And so it's not like, God is here and Jesus is somewhere down here. No, it's at the same level, just like those first two commandments. God and Jesus are at the same level, and this is crazy because he's here in a body. How can God be in a body? That's crazy. But Jesus had come to replace everything that was in place, and he said, "A new command I give you: love one another, as I have loved you. So you must love one another." The grace he had extended to them when they did dumb things, like these people were like, "Hey, you can't come in our town," and the disciples were like, "Why don't you just call down some fire from heaven? Like, just get rid of them." And Jesus is like, "All right, hang on." The grace he extended to them on that day, or the compassion he took on the woman with an issue of blood who'd basically been on her period for like 30 years. The time he calmed the sea instead of yelling at them for waking him up from his nap. How he invited someone to be one of his closest followers, that when he met him, insulted not only him, but his hometown, when he said, "What good can come from Nazareth?" Jesus is saying, that is how I want you to treat each other, and how I want you to treat every person that you meet for the rest of your life. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Your love for your heavenly Father will be demonstrated by how well you love each other, even the ones who are difficult to love. And compared to the extraordinarily complicated system of rules and laws and regulation that they had grown up with, this was so much less complicated, but it was so much more demanding. So much less complicated, so much more demanding. And as a person who went from having 60 classroom rules to 3, I can attest to the fact that the more rules you're able to strip away, the less complicated classroom management becomes. When you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 600 rules, everything in your life revolves around those rules. And I don't have to tell you that, because you've lived it. You've known people and places that were all about the rules. And your interactions with those people and those places, they were more about the rules than they were about the relationship. When you have a lot of rules, everything revolves around the rules. There's no room for relationship there. When everything revolves around the rules, it breaks the relationship. And you can't know how your heavenly Father feels about you, because it's all based on how well you're following the rules. And when everything revolves around the rules, you spend your time and your energy and your efforts looking for loopholes instead of pouring into relationships. This is why when people ask the question, like, what does the Bible say about blah, 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 blah? Like 9 times out of 10, they're looking for a loophole. What do the rules require? What's the smallest amount of law following I can get away with and still be good with God? Jesus walked into a religious environment where the leaders were all about the rules. They'd become professional loophole makers. And it drove people away from God because they didn't understand how he felt about them. The focus was on the rules, but Jesus had come to replace everything that was in place, to replace a system based on rules with one that was based on relationship. The new covenant closes all of those loopholes because there's only one command. You can't kind of slide between the rules if there's just one rule, and that's the brilliance of Jesus. I'm not always sure what to believe. I'm not always sure who to believe. But I pretty much always know what love requires of me, what the loving choice would be, what the relationship-forward choice would be. And And so the new covenant question, the Jesus question, is what does love require of you? You know the way the world works. You know the way the religious systems work. Not so with you. You don't get to retaliate when you're mad. You don't get to give them what they deserve. And I'll tell you what, folks, this is simple to understand, but it is hard to live out because you're probably like me. And sometimes I just want to sit in my feelings. Sometimes I want to stay mad at me, or stay mad, well, at me or at them. Sometimes I want to stay mad because what they did to me, what they did to my family, to my kids, to my people, it sucks. It wasn't fair. And it wasn't loving. And if they get to act that way, I want to act that way. What does love require of you? That is so cute and wonderful when people are cute and wonderful. But do you know what people are not always? Cute and wonderful, yeah. People are messy. They're selfish, they make poor choices, and then they either blame you for it or expect you to pull them out of it. They blow up their lives, they blow up your life. And the worst part about it is that this is so simple. What does love require of you? I know what love requires of me, I just don't want to do it. I know what love requires of me in almost every situation, and you probably do too. You know what the loving choice would be. You know what Jesus would do. He would love first. He would be compassionate, and he would forgive. And he did. He was kind to the people who hurled their insults at him. He was compassionate to people who'd blown up their own lives, and he even forgave the people who crucified him on the cross. He was kind to you even when you didn't deserve it. He was compassionate to you when you blamed him for everything that was wrong in your life. He welcomed you back home again and again and again, and he forgave you again and again and again, and he left you with one thing to do, and there are no loopholes. It is relationships first. What does love require of you? He left us with one thing to do. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you will just love one another. And when we get this right, it changes everything. It takes time, okay? I promise. You can get better at it. There are still times where I still really want to sit in my feelings and stay mad, but I know that isn't actually going to make me feel any better, and you're probably the same way. What makes you feel better, what makes me feel better, what gives you peace and helps you sleep at night is doing what love requires of you. What an opportunity for us. What a challenge. It's so simple. It's so much more demanding. And I think the only way to get there is to study the life of Jesus, to get to the point where that is the choice that you make, is to study the life of Jesus. And that's why we've taken 11 weeks in this series, to study the life of Jesus. That's why we've read chapter or two every day of the Gospels for the last 57 days, why we fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. And if you haven't done any of those things, it's never too late to start. We've got 4 fasts left. We would love for you to join us. None of it is easy. All of it's demanding. But I am telling you, it is worth it. It's worth it to learn to live like Jesus lived and to love like Jesus loved. Let's pray. God, thank you for making it simple. Thank you for making it easy to understand. And thank you for being there with us as we try to love the people around you like you did, like you would. God, I pray that we would see the people around us through your eyes, that we would see the things that make them do the things that they do, and that you would give us compassion for them, that you would give us the capacity to forgive, God, and to love like you loved. In your name, amen.
Love is the best thing we do.